The great hall of the Galactic Council was filled with noise and anger. 12 different alien races sat around the huge circle table, arguing about trade routes and territory borders. The Zephyrians looked like walking crystals that sparkled, blue and green in the light. Their bodies were clear and hard, and they spoke in musical tones that echoed through the chamber. Across from them sat the Sorok delegation. These lizard-like creatures had tough scales and sharp teeth. Their leader, General Vask, slammed his clawed hand on the table. "The mining rights to the Kepler system belong to us," he hissed. "My people found those asteroids first." Ambassador Kethter of the Voidborn floated above his chair. His body was made of gas and energy, contained inside a special suit that kept him together. He spoke in a voice that sounded like wind through empty space. "The Sorok claim many things, but proof is another matter entirely." The other races watched and waited. The Nexus representatives were robots with glowing red eyes. They calculated the profit margins of every deal. The Aquari looked like giant jellyfish swimming through the air. The Thorn King were plant people with bark-like skin and leaves for hair. Each species had their own wants and needs, and none of them trusted the others. This was how things had been for 3,000 years. The galaxy was divided among these 12 races, and they spent most of their time fighting over who owned what. Trade was difficult. Peace was rare. War was always. Just one argument away, Dr. Velinara sat in the observer section, taking notes on her crystal tablet. She was a Zephyrian scientist who studied old ruins and ancient history. While the politicians argued, she was thinking about something far more interesting than mining rights. In her bag, she carried data files about ruins found on distant worlds. Ruins that told a very different story about the galaxy's past. The ruins spoke of a 13th race. The old records called them humans. According to the ancient texts, these humans had once been powerful. They had big fleets of warships and controlled many star systems. They had colonies on dozens of worlds and trade routes that connected half the galaxy. But most scholars thought this was just a myth. Stories made up to explain certain mysteries. Why were there empty cities on some worlds? Why did some ancient space stations have rooms built for creatures that none of the current races could identify? The easiest answer was to invent a lost civilization. Dr. Velinara knew better. She had spent 20 years studying these so-called human artifacts. The technology was old and simple compared to what they had now. But there were strange things about it that didn't make sense. Energy readings that didn't match any known power source. Metal that seemed to fix itself when it was damaged. Weapon designs that looked basic but showed signs of incredible destruction. The most interesting discovery had been made just last month on the planet Kepler 442b. Her dig team had found the remains of what looked like a command center. Deep underground, protected by layers of rock and metal, they had discovered a data storage unit that was still working after thousands of years. The final message stored in that unit was what kept her awake at night. It was a voice recording, in a language that their computers could barely translate. The voice was calm but sad, speaking about a great journey beyond the rim and a promise to return when the galaxy needs us most. The recording also mentioned something called the Void Spawn, creatures that came from outside normal space. The message said these things were dangerous beyond understanding. They consumed entire worlds, leaving nothing behind but empty space. The humans had fought them for decades before finally deciding to leave the galaxy entirely. "We go now to find a way to stop them," the voice had said. "When we return, we will be ready. We will protect this galaxy, even if it forgets us." Dr. Velinara looked around the council chamber. These 12 races were so busy fighting each other that they had forgotten their own history. They had built their civilizations on the bones of another species and didn't even know it. The humans had given up everything to save the galaxy. And now they were nothing more than stories and myths. But what if they weren't myths? What if they were real? And what if they were coming back? The argument in the chamber grew louder. The Sorok were threatening to leave the council. The Zephyrians were calculating the cost of another trade war. The Nexus robots were already planning 3 different battle scenarios. None of them noticed the small alert that appeared on Dr. Velinara's tablet. Long-range sensors at the edge of the galaxy had detected something unusual. Energy signatures that didn't match any known starship design. Movement patterns that suggested a large fleet traveling at incredible speed. The readings were faint and hard to understand, but they were there. Dr. Velinara felt her crystal body grow cold. The energy signatures matched some of the readings she had found in the human ruins. Not exactly the same, but similar enough to make her worried. She tried to access more detailed sensor data, but her security clearance wasn't high enough. She looked up at the arguing politicians and wondered if she should interrupt them. But what would she say? That she thought the mythical 13th race was coming back? That the humans mentioned in ancient legends might be real? They would laugh at her, or worse, they would think she was crazy. Instead, she quietly gathered her things and left the chamber. She needed to get back to her laboratory and run more tests. She needed to compare the new sensor data with her archaeological findings, and she needed to figure out what it meant if the humans really were returning. As she walked through the corridors of the council station, she passed windows that showed the stars outside. Somewhere out there, beyond the edge of known space, something was moving toward them. Something that had been gone for 3,000 years. The galaxy was about to change in ways that none of them could imagine. The age of 12 races was ending. The age of 13 was about to begin. And Dr. Velinara was the only one who suspected the truth. Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of his ship, the UES Defiant, watching the stars grow brighter on the main screen. After 3,000 years away from home, the human fleet was finally returning to the galaxy they had left behind. It felt strange to see the familiar patterns of stars that his ancestors had once called home. The bridge was quiet, except for the soft hum of the ship's engines. Jake's crew worked at their stations, checking systems and monitoring the other ships in their fleet. 200 warships traveled together through the darkness of space, all heading toward the same destination, the galaxy they had abandoned so long ago. "Sir, we're getting readings from the home galaxy," said Lieutenant Sam Carter from her position at the sensor station. She was young for her rank, with short brown hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. "I'm detecting multiple civilizations in the areas where our colonies used to be." Jake nodded. This was what they had expected. 3,000 years was a long time. Of course, other species would have moved into the empty spaces left behind by humanity's exodus. The question was whether these new inhabitants would be friendly or hostile. "How many species are we looking at?" Jake asked. 12 distinct civilizations, sir. Their technology appears to be roughly equal to what we had before we left the galaxy. Maybe a little more advanced in some areas, but not by much. Commander Lisa Hayes looked up from her own station. She was Jake's second in command, a tall woman with red hair and a serious expression. "That's actually good news. It means we haven't lost too much ground while we were away." Jake almost smiled at that. Lisa was being polite. The truth was that humanity had advanced far beyond their old technology level during their exile. They had been forced to. The enemy that drove them from the galaxy, the creatures they called the Void Spawn, had pushed human science and engineering to incredible new heights. A voice crackled over the ship's communication system. "All ships, this is Admiral Kate Parker aboard the UES Retribution. Maintain stealth protocols. We observe first, then decide our next move." Jake touched the come button on his chair. "Understood, Admiral. Defiant will maintain position and monitor. Local communications. The human fleet had not spent 3,000 years sitting idle. When they first fled the galaxy, they had been desperate refugees running from an enemy they couldn't defeat. Now they were something else entirely. Their ships were powered by quantum cores that barely registered on normal sensors. Their weapons could tear holes in space itself. Most importantly, they had learned to fight enemies that existed partially, outside normal reality. "Sir," Carter said, "I'm picking up some kind of council meeting in the inner systems. Multiple species are gathered at what looks like a large space station. That's built where New Geneva used to be," Lisa observed, checking her star charts. "Our old capital." Jake felt a strange mix of emotions. New Geneva had been humanity's greatest achievement, a space station the size of a small moon that served as the center of human civilization. Now aliens were using it as their own meeting place, probably not even knowing what it had once been. "Captain," called Intelligence Officer Grace Miller from the back of the bridge. She was the ship's expert on alien cultures and languages. "I'm detecting something else in the long-range scans. Energy signatures that match the patterns we saw right before the void spawn attacked." The bridge fell silent. Every human in the fleet knew what that meant. The void spawn weren't just a bad memory from the past. They were still out there, still dangerous, and still looking for inhabited galaxies to destroy. "Are you certain?" Jake asked. "The readings are faint, but they're definitely there," Miller replied. "It's the same kind of dimensional distortion we recorded during the first invasions. They're not here yet, but they're coming." Jake felt his heart sink. They had hoped that the void spawn would have moved on to other galaxies by now. But apparently, these creatures were persistent. They had found humanity's old home and were planning to finish what they had started 3,000 years ago. "Send a secure message to Admiral Parker," Jake ordered. "Tell her what we've found." Within minutes, the Admiral's response came back. "Confirmed. We're detecting the same readings across multiple sectors. The void spawn have found the galaxy. We need to warn the locals and prepare for another war." Jake looked at his crew. They were all young people who had grown up hearing stories about the old war. Stories about planets that simply disappeared overnight. Stories about creatures that could step between dimensions like walking through doors. Stories about the desperate flight from a galaxy that was being consumed by living darkness. "Sir," Carter said quietly, "what do we do? These aliens don't know us. They might not even believe us if we try to warn them." "We make contact," Jake decided, carefully. "We need to convince them that we're not a threat, and then we need to convince them that something much worse is coming." The task ahead of them seemed impossible. How do you explain to strangers that you're the legendary 13th race from their ancient myths? How do you convince them that invisible monsters from outside reality are about to destroy their entire civilization? How do you ask for trust when you've been gone for 3,000 years? But Jake had faith in humanity's greatest strength, their ability to adapt and survive. They had done it before when they fled the galaxy. They had done it during their long exile in the Andromeda Galaxy, and they would do it again now. "Lisa, prep a diplomatic team," Jake ordered. "Grace, I want you to study everything we can gather about these 12 species. Languages, cultures, politics, everything. We need to understand who we're dealing with." "What? About the fleet?" Lisa asked. "We stay hidden for now. Once we make contact, we'll need to prove we're not a threat. But we also need to be ready to prove we're strong enough to help them fight what's coming." Jake looked out at the stars again. 3,000 years ago, humanity had run away from this galaxy in fear. Now they were returning as something far more dangerous than what they had fled from. They had become the monsters that even monsters feared. The question was whether they could convince their new neighbors that they were the good kind of monsters. the kind that fought other monsters instead of eating civilizations for breakfast. "Take us closer to the inner systems," Jake commanded, "but keep us cloaked. It's time to see what our old home has become." The U.E.'s Defiant adjusted course, leading the human fleet deeper into the galaxy. Behind them, 200 warships followed like shadows, invisible to the sensors of the 12 species, who had no idea that their ancient legends were about to become very real. The humans were coming home. The only question was whether home would welcome them or try to destroy them. The merchant ship Peaceful Venture was having a normal day. Captain Zixla was moving cargo between the Zephyrian colonies and the neutral trade zone, the same route he had flown for the past 15 years. His crystal body flickered with contentment. As he watched the stars pass by on his view screen, his ship was small and old, but it was reliable. The cargo hold was full of Zephyrian memory crystals that would fetch a good price at the trade stations. It was honest work, and Zixla was proud of his simple life as a merchant. The peace was shattered when his ship's sensors started screaming warnings. "What in the void is that?" Zixla muttered, his crystal form flashing red with alarm. Scanner, a massive object had appeared from nowhere. It was huge, at least 10 times the size of his little merchant ship. The hull was black as space itself, so dark that it seemed to absorb the light from nearby stars. Strange angles and sharp edges made it look like a weapon more than a ship. Zixla had never seen anything like it. It didn't match any known ship design from the 12 races. The energy readings were completely foreign, showing power levels that made his own ship look like a toy. "Unknown vessel," he transmitted on all standard frequencies. "This is Captain Zixla of the merchant ship Peaceful Venture. Please identify yourself." For several long minutes, there was no response. Zixla's crystal body dimmed with fear. Pirates sometimes used unknown ship designs, but this was something else entirely. This ship was too advanced, too powerful to be operated by common criminals. Then his radio crackled to life. The voice that came through was speaking perfect Galactic. Standard, but with an accent that Zixla had never heard before. "This is Commander Ryan Brooks of the United Earthship Vanguard. We mean no harm. We wish to establish diplomatic contact with your government." Zixla's confusion grew deeper. "Earth? I'm not familiar with that system. Are you perhaps from the Outer Rim colonies?" There was a pause before the voice replied. "In a manner of speaking. We represent humanity. We've been away for some time." The word humanity sent a chill through Zixla's crystal body. Every school child knew the ancient legends about the mythical 13th race. But those were just stories, weren't they? Tales told to explain certain mysteries about the galaxy's past. I need to report this to my government," Zixla stammered. "We understand," Commander Brooks replied. "We're transmitting our current location and a request for peaceful contact. We'll wait here for your representatives to arrive." The black ship simply stopped moving and waited. Zixla quickly plotted a course for the nearest Zephyrian outpost, his mind racing with questions. If these really were humans, then everything the galaxy thought it knew about history was wrong. 3 days later, the emergency session of the Galactic Council was in chaos. The recording from Captain Zixla had been studied by experts from all 12 species. The creature in the transmission matched the ancient descriptions almost perfectly. 2 arms, 2 legs, pale skin, dark hair on its head. It was bipedal, and roughly the same size as most of the council races. But it was the casual way the ship had appeared that truly frightened the politicians. Their sensors had detected nothing until the vessel was already there, as if it had stepped through a door. In space itself. "This is impossible," General Vask of the Sorak hissed. "The humans are myths, stories. They never existed." Ambassador Kefter's gaseous form swirled with agitation. "The evidence suggests otherwise." The ship's technology is far beyond anything we currently possess. Dr. Velanara sat in the observer section, her crystal body bright with excitement. Finally, someone else was taking her research seriously. She had been called to testify about her archaeological findings, and for the first time in years, the politicians were actually listening. The ruins on Kepler 442b tell a consistent story. She explained. A highly advanced civilization that left the galaxy voluntarily. The timing matches the legends perfectly. But why would they leave? Asked Representative Colvan of the Nexus. His robot body processed the data with mechanical precision. If they were truly advanced, what could have driven them away? Dr. Velanara's glow dimmed slightly. According to the final transmission we recovered, they were fleeing something called the Void Spawn, creatures that came from outside normal space. A council chamber fell silent. The name itself seemed to carry weight, even though none of them had heard it before. Commander Brooks waited patiently in the designated meeting area. His ship, the UE's Vanguard, floated in empty space surrounded by a dozen alien vessels. Each species had sent representatives, but none of them had gotten too close. They were clearly nervous about his technology. He didn't blame them. The Vanguard was a relatively small ship by human standards, but it carried enough firepower to destroy a small moon. Its quantum drives could cross the galaxy in days instead of months. Its shields could deflect weapons that these aliens had never dreamed of. But Brooks wasn't here to fight. He was here to save lives. Sir, his communications officer reported, we're receiving a transmission from the largest alien vessel. They're requesting permission to come aboard. Granted, Brooks replied, but maintain security protocols. We still don't know if we can trust them. The delegation that beamed aboard the Vanguard was unlike anything Brooks had ever seen. The Zephyrian representative looked like a walking sculpture made of living crystal. The Sorok ambassador was a large lizard with intelligent eyes and sharp teeth. The Void-born delegate was a cloud of gas contained in a mechanical suit. I am Ambassador Kefter, the gas creature said, his voice echoing strangely in the ship's corridors. I speak for the Council of 12. We are curious about your claims. Brooks led them to the ship's main conference room. The walls were covered with star charts showing the galaxy as it had been 3,000 years ago. Human colonies were marked in blue, while current alien territories were shown in red. The overlap was obvious and uncomfortable. Your people have been gone for 3,000 years, Kefter continued. These worlds have been settled, developed, populated. You cannot simply reclaim them. We're not asking you to leave, Brooks replied calmly. We're asking you to prepare for war. There's something coming that will threaten all of us. Something that forced us to leave in the first place. The Void Spawn, Dr. Velanara said quietly. She had been allowed to join the delegation as an expert on human archaeology. Brooks nodded grimly. You've heard of them? Only in ancient records. What are they exactly? Brooks activated a holographic display that showed recordings from the old war. The images were disturbing. Planets that simply vanished, leading behind empty space. Ships that were torn apart by invisible forces. Creatures that looked like living shadows with too many teeth. They exist partially outside normal reality. Brooks explained. They consume matter and energy, but they also consume the very fabric of spacetime itself. Wherever they go, they leave nothing behind but void. The alien delegates stared at the recordings in horror. Even the Nexus robot, which had no emotions, seemed disturbed by what it was seeing. But you fought them, the Sorok ambassador said. You drove them away. We ran, Brooks corrected. We barely escaped with our lives. Humanity spent 3,000 years in exile, developing new technology and new tactics. We're not the same species that fled the galaxy. We're stronger now. Smarter, more dangerous. And you believe these creatures are returning? Kefter asked. We know they are. Our sensors have detected their advanced scouts. They'll be here within months, maybe weeks. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. The 12 races had spent centuries fighting each other over territory and resources. Now they were being told that something far worse was coming. To destroy them all. What do you want from us? The Zephyrian delegate asked. Cooperation, Brooks replied. We need to work together if we're going to survive this. Your people have developed technologies that we don't have. Combined with our advances, we might have a chance. And if we refuse? Brooks looked at each of them in turn. Then you'll face the void spawn alone. And based on what I've seen of your current military capabilities, you'll lose. The truth was harsh, but necessary. The galaxy was about to change whether they wanted it to or not. The only question was whether they would face the future together or separately. The age of myths was ending. The age of survival was about to begin. Admiral Shektar of the Sorak Imperial Navy was not impressed by human claims. He had heard the stories about the mythical 13th race, but stories were just stories. These creatures calling themselves humans might have advanced technology, but they were still just another species, trying to reclaim territory that no longer belonged to them. I don't trust them, he told his officers aboard the battleship Razor's Edge. They appear from nowhere after 3,000 years and expect us to believe they're here to save us? This smells like conquest disguised as diplomacy. His fleet consisted of 12 of the most powerful warships in Sarok space. Each one was armed with plasma cannons that could melt through solid rock. Their energy shields could deflect most known weapons. They were the pride of the Sarok military, and Shektar was confident in their abilities. Sir, his sensor officer reported, the human ship is approaching the designated coordinates. It's alone, just as they promised. Shektar studied the display. The human vessel was smaller than his flagship, but there was something unsettling about its appearance. The hull was so black that it seemed to absorb light itself. No weapon ports were visible, no obvious shield generators. It looked more like a piece of space itself than a warship. All ships form attack formation, Shektar ordered. Let's see what these humans are really made of. Aboard the UES Vanguard, Commander Brooks watched the alien ships arrange themselves in a classic battle. Formation. He sighed and turned to his weapons officer, Lieutenant Amy Foster. She was young and eager, with blonde hair and bright eyes that always seemed ready for action. Sir, are we really going to demonstrate our capabilities? She asked. These ships have families aboard. Their crews have no idea what they're dealing with. They need to understand what they're facing, Brooks replied. Both us and what's coming. Sometimes the only way to prevent a war is to show overwhelming force. Brooks had been hoping to avoid this confrontation, but the Sorok had insisted on testing human claims. If they wanted a demonstration, he would give them one they would never forget. Sir, the communications officer called out, Admiral Shektar is hailing us. He's demanding that we surrender and submit to inspection. Tell him we decline, Brooks said calmly. Inform him that we're about to begin the demonstration he requested. The Sarok fleet opened fire without warning. Plasma bolts that could punch through armor plating struck the Vanguard's hull and simply disappeared. The human ship's shields didn't even flicker. It was like watching someone throw pebbles at a mountain. Their weapons are more primitive than we expected, Foster observed. Our shields are barely registering the impacts. Brooks nodded. The gap in technology was even larger than they had hoped. During their exile, humanity had been forced to develop defenses against weapons that could tear apart space itself. Conventional energy weapons were like gentle rain against their shields. Begin the demonstration, Brooks ordered. But remember, We're trying to impress them, not destroy them." The Vanguard didn't return fire. Instead, it activated a gravity well generator that had been developed for use against the void spawn. The device created a controlled gravitational field that could bend space around a target. The effect on the Sorok fleet was immediate and humiliating. Their ships began to list helplessly to one side as the artificial gravity pulled them out of formation. No amount of engine power could compensate for the invisible force that had grabbed them. "What's happening?" Shektar demanded over the comm. "Channel, what are you doing to my ships?" "We're demonstrating the difference between our technology and yours," Brooks replied. "Your vessels are now completely under our control. We could arrange them in any formation we choose." To prove his point, Brooks ordered the gravity generator to be adjusted. The Sorok ships were gently nudged into a new arrangement, their hulls. Spelling out the word "Hello" in Galactic Standard when viewed from above. "Admiral Shektar," Brooks continued, "your ships are now arranged to spell out a greeting. We could have arranged them to spell out debris instead. Do you need further demonstration?" The humiliation was complete. The most powerful fleet in Sorok space had been reduced to a child's toy in the hands of a single human vessel. But Brooks wasn't finished. He needed them to understand what they were really dealing with. "Now watch carefully," he told the alien fleet. "This is what we're actually afraid of." At the edge of the system, space itself began to tear. The fabric of reality split open like a wound, revealing the darkness beyond. From that tear emerged something that hurt to look at directly. A scout ship of the void spawn. The creature ship was impossible to describe in normal terms. It existed partially in normal space and partially in dimensions that shouldn't exist. Its hull shifted and twisted, sometimes solid, sometimes translucent. Eyes that weren't really eyes stared out from its surface, and tentacles that might have been weapons or might have been limbs waved in the vacuum. "All ships, this is Admiral Shektar," the Sarrak commander broadcast on all frequencies. "Open fire on the unknown contact." The combined firepower of 12 battleships struck the void. Spawn scout. Plasma bolts passed through its hull without effect. Missiles exploded harmlessly against its shields. The creature didn't even seem to notice the attack. Instead, it turned its attention to the nearest Sorok ship. Space around the vessel began to warp and bend. The ship's hull started to dissolve, not from damage, but from reality itself becoming unstable. The crew's screams cut off abruptly as the ship simply ceased to exist. "Now you see what we're dealing with," Brooks said grimly. "This is just a scout. The main fleet has thousands of these things, and they're all much larger." The Vanguard moved to intercept the void spawn creature. This time, Brooks didn't hold back. Quantum torpedoes launched from hidden weapons bays, each one designed to disrupt the dimensional fields that allowed the creatures to exist between realities. The torpedoes struck the scout ship and detonated in flashes of impossible light. The creature's form solidified as it was forced fully into normal space. Once it was locked in their reality, conventional weapons could hurt it. The Vanguard's main guns fired beams of concentrated energy that tore through the creature's hull. Void Spawn Scout died with a sound like reality screaming. Its body collapsed into normal matter and drifted away as debris. The tear in space sealed itself, leaving only empty vacuum where the creature had emerged. "How?" Shektar asked, his voice filled with awe and terror. "How did you do that?" 3,000 years of practice, Brooks replied. "We've been fighting these things longer than your civilization has existed. We know their weaknesses, their tactics, their patterns. But even with all our knowledge, we barely managed to drive them away from our original territory." The Sorok admiral was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was much smaller than before. How many of them are coming? Thousands, Brooks said. Maybe tens of thousands. They travel in fleets that can consume entire star systems. And they're not just interested in destroying you. They want to erase you from existence entirely. What can we do? Brooks released the gravity field, holding the Sarok ships. They drifted back into normal formation, their crews shaken but alive. You can listen to us. You can work with us. You can trust that we're here to help, not to conquer. Doctor. Valinara's voice came over the com from her research ship. She had been observing the demonstration from a safe distance. The energy readings match perfectly with the archaeological evidence. These creatures are what drove the humans away 3,000 years ago. And now they're back, Brooks confirmed. The question is, will you help us fight them, or will you? Face them alone? Admiral Shektar looked at the debris field where one of his ships had been moments before. An entire crew had been wiped out in seconds by an enemy that his weapons couldn't even touch. The human ship had destroyed the creature, easily, making it look simple. What do you need from us? He asked. First, we need you to stop fighting each other, Brooks replied. Every ship you lose in civil wars is a ship that can't help defend against the void spawn. Second, we need to share technology. Your people have developed innovations that we don't have. Combined with our advances, we might be able to create weapons that can hurt these creatures. And third, Brooks paused, choosing his words carefully. Third, you need to accept that humanity's back. We're not the same species that left 3,000 years ago. We're stronger, smarter, and much more dangerous. But we're still the same people who chose to leave rather than watch the galaxy burn. The demonstration was over. The Sarok fleet limped back to their home system, carrying news that would change everything. The mythical 13th race was real, and they were the only thing standing between the galaxy and total annihilation. The age of disbelief was ending. The age of preparation was about to begin. The main void spawn fleet arrived like a nightmare made real. It emerged from the galactic core as a writhing mass of living darkness that stretched across entire star systems. Where it passed, suns went out. Planets simply vanished, leaving behind empty space that hurt to look at. The combined fleets of the 12 races had gathered at the edge of the core systems, but they looked pitifully small compared to the approaching horror. Even with human technology upgrades, their ships were still outnumbered 1,000 to 1. Admiral Kate Parker stood on the bridge of the UES Retribution, watching the sensor displays with grim determination. She was a veteran of the original war against the void spawn, one of the few humans old enough to remember the desperate flight from the galaxy. Now she was back to finish what her generation had started. How many ships do we have? She asked her aide. 2,000 vessels from all 13 races, came the reply. The humans are providing the heavy firepower, but every species has contributed what they can. Parker nodded. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough. But it was what they had, and they would make it work somehow. Captain Jake Morrison commanded a mixed squadron of human and alien ships. His own vessel, the UES Defiant, was flanked by Zephyrian crystal ships that sparkled like jewels in the starlight. Their beautiful forms now bristled with hastily installed human weapons, quantum torpedoes and gravity, cannons that their crews barely understood how to operate. Sir, Lieutenant Sam Carter reported from her sensor station. The void spawn are moving faster than expected. They'll reach the outer colonies within hours. Jake felt the familiar weight of command settling on his shoulders. Millions of innocent lives depended on what happened in the next few hours. He thought about the families on the planets behind them, the children who would never grow up if they failed here. All ships, this is Captain Morrison, he broadcast. To his squadron, remember what we've learned about these creatures. They're strongest when they exist between dimensions. Our job is to force them into our reality where we can hurt them. Commander Ryan Brooks was leading another mixed formation, near the center of the battle line. His ship, the UES Vanguard, was surrounded by Sorok battleships, whose crews had learned to respect human technology. Admiral Shektar himself had requested to serve under Brooks, a gesture that would have been unthinkable just weeks before. The key is coordination, Brooks explained over the comm to his mixed fleet. Human ships will use quantum disruptors to lock the void spawn in normal space. Once they're solid, your conventional weapons can hurt them. But you only have seconds before they phase out again. Dr. Velinara worked frantically in her mobile laboratory aboard a Zephyrian research vessel. She had been studying the void spawn for weeks, trying to understand their weaknesses. Her crystal body flickered with exhaustion, but she couldn't rest. Too many lives depended on finding an answer. They're not just consuming matter, she reported to Admiral Parker. They're erasing it from existence entirely. Every ship they destroy, every planet they consume, it's gone forever. If we can't stop them here, there won't be a galaxy left to save. The first wave of void spawn creatures hit the outer defense line like a tsunami of living darkness. They came in shapes that defied description. Some looked like giant jellyfish made of shadow. Others resembled mechanical spiders with too many legs. All of them existed partially outside normal reality, making them nearly impossible to target. A query fleet tried to engage them first. Their jellyfish-like ships fired bioelectric weapons that could disable most technology. Against the void spawn, the attacks had no effect. The creatures flowed around the Aquari vessels like water, then began to tear them apart from the inside. All human ships engage quantum disruptors. Admiral Parker ordered. The human vessels opened fire with weapons that had been 3,000 years in the making. Beams of pure quantum energy struck the void spawn creatures, forcing them to solidify. In normal space, suddenly, the monsters that had been untouchable became vulnerable. The alien fleets opened fire immediately. Plasma cannons, energy beams, and missile barrages tore into the now solid creatures. The void spawn screamed with voices that came from outside reality, that they bled and died like any other enemy. "It's working," Carter reported from the Defiant. "We're actually hurting them," but the victory was short-lived. The quantum disruptors could only maintain their effect for a few seconds at a time. As soon as the beams stopped, the creatures phased back between dimensions and became untouchable again. And for every void spawn that died, 10 more emerged from the darkness behind them. "We're being overwhelmed," Brooks reported. "There are too many of them. We need a new strategy." Dr. Velinara had been listening to the battle reports when inspiration struck. She had been studying the ancient human databases, looking for clues about how they had fought these creatures before. Buried in the oldest files, she found something called the Genesis Protocol. "Admiral Parker," she called over the comm. "I found something. The humans developed a way to permanently seal the G. Dimensional rifts during the original war. It's called the Genesis Protocol." "Why didn't they use it before?" Parker asked. "Because it requires the sacrifice of the entire fleet," Velinara replied grimly. "Every ship would need to channel their power into a single quantum field that would strengthen reality itself across the entire galaxy. The ships providing the power would be destroyed in the process." Parker felt her heart sink. They were being asked to choose between certain death and possible extinction. But when she looked at the tactical display, she realized they didn't really have a choice. The void spawn were breaking through their lines. Within hours, they would reach the populated worlds. "How many ships would we need?" she asked. "At least 1,000, positioned in a perfect sphere around the galactic core. And they would need to represent all 13 species the field requires. The combined technologies of every race to work properly." Parker made the hardest decision of her life. All ships, this is Admiral Parker. I'm transmitting the Genesis Protocol specifications to your computers. This is our last chance to save the galaxy. The plan was desperate and complicated. The human ships would form the inner ring, providing the quantum generators needed to create the field. The alien vessels would surround them, each species contributing their unique technology to amplify and stabilize the effect. Cephrean crystal ships would focus the energy like lenses. Sorok plasma generators would provide raw power. Nexus computational systems would handle the complex calculations needed to maintain the field. Every race had a part to play in humanity's final gambit. Sir, Carter said quietly, the power requirements will overload our quantum cores. None of us will survive the activation. Jake looked around his bridge at the young faces of his crew. They were scared, but they were ready. 3,000 years of exile had led to this moment, the chance to save the galaxy that had forgotten them. I know, he said, but this is what we came back for. This is why humanity spent 3,000 years learning to fight monsters, so that when the time came, we could be the monsters that other monsters fear. The final battle formation took shape around the galactic core. 1,000 ships from 13 species formed a perfect sphere, their weapons and power systems linked by quantum fields that human engineers had never dreamed possible. Genesis Protocol ready, reported Lieutenant Amy Foster from the Vanguard. All ships report ready for activation. Admiral Parker took one last look at the tactical display. The void spawn were closing in from all sides, their dark forms writhing with hunger for destruction. Behind the human fleet, billions of innocent lives waited for salvation. For the galaxy, she said quietly, activate Genesis Protocol. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. Every ship in the formation began channeling their power into a single quantum field that grew to encompass the entire galaxy. Reality itself became stronger, more solid, more resistant to interdimensional intrusion. The void spawn, caught between dimensions as the field activated, began to collapse back into the darkness from which they came. Their screams of rage and pain echoed across space as they were forced out of normal reality entirely. One by one, the ships providing power to the Genesis field overloaded and exploded. The human vessels went first, their quantum cores burning out in brilliant flashes of light. Then the alien ships began to fail as their systems reached critical overload. Jake Morrison watched his bridge fill with smoke and sparks as the defiant systems failed around him. It's been an honor serving with you all, he told his crew as the ship's hull began to buckle. Brooks felt the Vanguard shaking apart beneath his feet. Through the view screen, he could see the quantum field spreading across the galaxy like a wave of pure light. We did it, he whispered. We actually did it. Dr. Velanara watched from her research vessel as the Genesis Protocol reached completion. The dimensional barriers that separated normal space from the void. Spawn's realm had been strengthened beyond anything the creatures could break through. The galaxy was safe. Of the 1,000 ships that had participated in the Genesis Protocol, only a few dozen survived. Most were small vessels that had been on the outer edge of the formation. The human fleet was almost entirely destroyed, along with most of the heavy cruisers from the Oath.